Hi, there we go. My name is Kelly, and I live in the head of Jador on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. And I'm going to be reading today from Bluenose Magic by the legendary Helen Creighton. I'm going to start off with the introduction. I'm only going to read it in parts. I'm not reading the whole thing right now. But I'll start off with the introduction written by Helen Creighton. Let's try these first. Waste not, want not. Perhaps it is because I was brought up on this maxim that a trip to collect folk songs was never wasted if the songs I was seeking were not forthcoming. In my early collecting days, which began in 1928 in my native Nova Scotia, folklore was thrust upon me when singers of mixed English and German descent talked between songs of the things that interested them. It seemed to please them when I jotted everything down, and at first I did it for that reason. As time went on, my field of research and knowledge of the subject broadened, and I found the same beliefs and others of equal importance occurring in various ethnic groups. I realized then that these items were valuable and devised a system of guiding conversation to whatever field of folklore seemed most likely to be productive under the circumstances. These were later transferred into index cards, and the collection grew steadily. Knowing this, Dr. Wayland Hand, an old academic friend and head of the folklore department of the University of California, Los Angeles, suggested that I compile the Nova Scotia edition of the great continent-wide dictionary of popular beliefs and superstitions. Being employed by the National Museum of Canada, I took this suggestion to the director, Dr. R. G. Glover, and to Dr. Carmen Roy, head of the folklore section, and it met with their approval. I had enough material in my files, and by this time was anxious to release it in published form. Not that my study has been exhaustive, and some chapters are lean, for collectors tend to pursue the subjects that interest them the most. Crops and animal husbandry go under this lesser heading. I wish now that I had asked more about fairies for my French colleagues, have been more successful here than I have been. Other subjects, however, were sought with diligence, but always when singing was over, for folk songs were my main objective, with the exception of a 4-year period just before I joined the museum. This digression was the result of a folklore course at Indiana University attended in 1942, through the kindness of the Rockefeller Foundation. The following summer, while visiting in Chester on the southwestern shore, Tancook Island, and its stories were mentioned. A few days on the island convinced me that this whole county should be studied and my new training put to work. Hence the folklore of Lunenburg County, published by the National Museum in 1950. I have heard this book being used in studies as far as of this book being used in studies as far afield as Germany and France. This is not surprising, as the county was selected by immigrants from these two countries. The present volume is an extension of that. There are 5 main ethnic strains in Nova Scotia, and through intermarriage there has been a good deal of acculturation. The total population today runs about 750,000. Of these, 70% are of British descent and can be found from Yarmouth to Cape North, with its largest number in the center of the peninsula. People of Irish descent can be found anywhere, although they seem to have settled mainly around the coast. The 182,823 who claim Scotland as their ancestral homes are found mostly in Colchester, Pictou, and Antigonish counties on the peninsula, and on the Isle of Cape Breton, where the Gaelic tongue is still spoken by some of the older folk and studied by their descendants. The French, known throughout the Maritime Provinces as Acadians, number 87,883 at the time of this printing, and I will go look at that in a second. Their settlements are mainly at the two extremes of the province. Germans who came to Lunenburg County in 1753 now have a population of 45,441 at the time of this writing. Aboriginals are Mi'kmaq and are slightly over 4,000 in number. They live largely on reservations at Shubenacadie, at about the center of the peninsula, and at Eskasoni and Cape Breton. There are also 11,900 Negroes, as of this publishing by Helen Creighton, most of whom are in the Dartmouth-Halifax area, with smaller groups in Weymouth, Stellarton, Truro, New Glasgow, and Guysborough. Many are slave descendants who came during and immediately after War of 1812. Some of their beliefs are here, and more may be found in Arthur Faust's folklore from Nova Scotia. You may wonder why I refer throughout the manuscript to people from Scotland as Scotch, which nowadays I'm told is applied only to whiskey. I debated this word and decided that we have always used it here. Moreover, Dr. W. Roy Mackenzie, a native and great English scholar whose early folk song collecting was the source of my inspiration, wrote of his singers as Scotch. It's a good word, and to say it differently would not be true to my background. It appears in the informant's own words, and in this way I hope that something of their warm and interesting personalities will reach the reader of this collection. They are kind, good people, serious one moment, at the next reveling a sense of fun and quick humor. To work with them means the making of abiding friendships. The place where each item was found is also given, and the ethnic background, by its variety, will give some idea of the intermingling which has occurred through marriage. I wish to thank the National Museum of Canada, under whose auspices most of this collection has been done, Mount Allison University for the use of the valuable library books, the Public Archives of Nova Scotia for space to store unpublished manuscripts, the Halifax Memorial Library, Provincial Library, and Dartmouth Library for assistance when other books were needed for consultation. Each chapter has its own heading and small introduction, so nothing more need to be said about them here. Other books on the same subject are being published in many parts of the United States and several Canadian provinces, all part of a great comparative study of our folklore and mythology. Evergreen, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, Helen Creighton. I'm just going to really quick see when this was originally published. I've got 1899. Oh, that's Helen Creighton. 1899 to 1989. Oh, I didn't know she was that old. There you go. 1968. So some of the wording is appropriate, and the numbers that they have for the populations in Nova Scotia are all from 1968. I will continue on with the supernatural. I might not get all the way through it, but we'll see where I get. So this is called Chapter 1, The Supernatural. If all the material at hand on the supernatural were included in this volume, there would be room for little else. Some is included in the folklore of Lunenburg County. Bluenose Ghosts is devoted entirely to this subject. Stories are presented in the narrator's own words, and a running commentary attempts to explain why Nova Scotians interpret their beliefs as they do. Another such book is being planned. Consequently, our visions, forerunners, ghosts, and treasure lore are touched upon lightly here, and the reader is referred to the above-mentioned books. Perhaps Nova Scotians are particularly sensitive to supernatural experiences because we are a seafaring people, or, if not, at least we have the sea all around us. Material has always come easy, but now, since Bluenose Ghosts appeared in 1957, it has been astonishing how many people tell of experiences they wish to share, but they must be sure they will have a sympathetic ear. Heretofore, they fear the scoffer who would laugh and say they only imagine the event, for nothing is more frustrating to the person who has experienced the unexplained to this day. For nothing is more frustrating to the person who has experienced the unexplainable. To this day, the telephone will bring calls from complete strangers whose voices may be charged with emotion, so deeply has a brief touch with the supernatural affect them. It may have happened recently, or it may go all the way back to adolescence. Perhaps they have kept it locked in their hearts for many years. A chance encounter at a supermarket, on a street corner, or even a party may be something they have been waiting for. And the other day it happened when coming at a church. These things are pondered and discussed in the academic parlor and by fishermen as they mend their nets, for supernatural is no respecter of persons. Quote by Helen Creighton. Visions. This story is called The Countess of Dufferin and the Arlington. A few years ago, I was staying at Ragged Islands Inn on the southwestern shore when Mrs. Oswald McMillan was brought to tell her stories. These had come down in her family, and she told them with a studied dramatic effect. She spoke quietly and relished every word. We sat in a small, cozy sitting room with logs burning in the old-fashioned fireplace. There were pictures of sailing vessels on the walls, and a ship's model with sails set stood on the mantelpiece. The sea was near, and occasionally we could hear the surf beating against the rocky shore. She said, "Sometime in the 1800s, when the Earl of Dufferin was Governor-General of Canada, a ship was built in Quebec and christened in honor of his wife, the Countess of Dufferin. The vessel's first few trips were uneventful. Then she went to St. John and loaded with lumber and deals for Londonderry, Ireland, setting forth, strangely enough, on Christmas Day. Perhaps this was to take advantage of the weather, for the sea was smooth, the wind fair, and the sun shone from a cloudless sky, an unusually fine day for that time of year. This fair weather, however, was not to last, and a few days later they ran into a tremendous hurricane. This continued for 2 days. The wind changed then and made crossed seas so that she was soon dismasted. They jettisoned their deck load of deals, but they could not prevent the raging seas from sweeping over the rails and getting into their food and water. Even the apple barrels, their last hope, were taken from them when an unexpected wave swept them overboard. In their extremity, the captain told the crew that they would not drown, but they might starve, since they had been swept far off their usual course and were not likely to be rescued. At that time they had no means of communicating their plight. No human means, that is. The captain said there was nothing left for them to do but pray. We may suppose that accounts for what happened next, but we must now turn to another ship. About the time the Countess of Dufferin left St. John, the Arlington, a vessel built in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, and skippered by Captain Davis of that port, set sail from Liverpool, England, for New York. She too was favored with fine weather, which held, and there was every probability of a record trip. After they had been at sea for a week, the second mate was startled one evening when Captain Davis suddenly appeared on the deck like a crazy wild man, and shouted to the men at the wheel, "Luff, luff, quick, hail of distress!" The mate looked at him in astonishment. "Captain Davis," he said, "what's the matter?" The captain looked at him in amazement. "Didn't you hear the hail of distress?" he asked. The mate assured him he hadn't. So they turned to the wheelsman, but he hadn't heard it either, nor had either of them seen anything unusual to account for it. Supposing the captain had been resting, the mate made his own obvious remarks. "You were dreaming." The captain was indignant and said with no hesitation, "I was not dreaming, I was wide awake." He fell silent for a moment and then added, "The strange part of it is that whoever called for help also gave me the course we should take. It was 52 north by 21 west. The men watched him anxiously and began to feel uncomfortable. The mate knew that his captain was a stern man who took advice from no one, yet he couldn't keep from saying, "That's 3 days' sail from here." The captain paid no attention and gave the wheelsman a change of course. Now they were really afraid, and recalled that another Yarmouth captain had recently gone insane at sea. They dared not disobey, and the wheelsman followed his new directions. Before long, they too reached turbulent waters, and these worsened as they sailed along. There was little sleep for the uneasy crew, for they had no idea what to expect. On the third night, the captain doubled the lookouts, and again were ordered. The order was obeyed but not relished. The captain paced the deck, well aware that he was being observed closely. There was no sound but the wind in the rigging and the black ocean roaring past. Then, at 2 a.m., the lookout cried that there was something on their lee. "Can we clear it?" the captain called. The lookout said they could, and a moment later identified the object as a vessel without lights, the worst thing to be encountered upon the sea at night. As soon as they were close enough to hear, Captain Davis clasped his megaphone and shouted, "Who are you, and why haven't you got your lights up?" The answer came back swiftly with a tone of great relief. "We are the Countess of Dufferin out of St. John. We're waterlogged and have nothing to put lights up with. Will you stand by and take us off?" Officers and crew were speechless. Not so Captain Davis, who matter-of-factly and perhaps with a touch of "I told you so" in his voice, "Certainly we'll stand by and take you off. That's what we came for." Having made himself clear and leaving orders with his crew for the night, they went below to sleep. When daybreak came, the seas were still high, but the rescue was effected. The last one to step over the Arlington's rail from the stricken ship was, of course, the captain. And at that precise moment, the sun came out, and they were able to take their position. Officers and crew looked at Captain Davis with a new respect, for they were exactly 52 north by 21 west, the very spot where the voice had directed him. I will leave that there for now, and I will get some more on. Now go wash your hands. Take care.